Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Today is I'm going to start crying already, John. Today is a very special show for me and certainly for my guest. John LaBarge is the author of a new book entitled A Man in His Kingdom, and it's about Representative Cola Hudson, who was very close to John and friendship with me too. So John, welcome to the show.
Hi Pat, nice to see you again.
Thank you. We haven't seen each other
I
in a
know,
while,
it's been
John.
a while.
So we always ask our guests to tell a little bit about themselves, so jump right in.
Sure, native Vermonter, born and raised in Burlington, Vermont, and then went to all the Burlington public schools, and when I got married, my wife Kitty and I moved to Grand Isle, and I worked for Grand Union for 16 years, 9 of those years was in management. And I left Grand Union to open up our own small video store in South Hero during the video craze. And we ran that for 24 years. And during that time, I did several things. I got my private pilot's license and ran for the legislature and won the seat. And so that's where I met Cola, was during those 10 years that I served during the Howard Dean administration. And then after that,
and you
I
had
went
a
to
leadership role, you should explain.
I did. I was 4 years as assistant minority leader and spent 2 years as majority leader, and then retired my seat to move on and do something different, and went to the Agency of Transportation. And I'm just retired, announced my retirement today. I'll be retiring
that's so
June
awesome.
1st.
Because in the back of the book, you said, I'm retired. I said, he is not. What's he doing? So he emails me and goes, today.
Yes.
So we're going to put a picture of the book and
Sure.
Cola's picture, which is a wonderful picture. Cola, what can you say about Cola? He was just Vermont.
He was
just the
unbelievable.
most unique man that I've ever met, ever. So why did you want to write this book, and how did you even start? Because to capture the essence of anyone is hard, but especially somebody like Cola.
Yeah, it's, I guess I realized that within probably the first few months of knowing Cola, that here was a man whose story is disappearing, much like World War veterans. You know, they're not around anymore, and their stories are lost. And Cola grew up on a farm that his grandfather bought in 1903, during the 20s, during the Depression. And so that whole story is lost. And here was a man that started from humble beginnings. He was a janitor when he ran for the legislature, and he won, and his community elected him for the following 36 years.
Amazing.
Had great respect for him up there. And Cola, the kingdom was his everything. In fact, he said to me once, he said, when I get into Danville, I suddenly realize I'm back home from whence my strength comes.
Wow.
And I won't go into giving away parts of the book, but one of the things he said to me as we marched through the field to the upper 40, as I called it one day, and he was taking his time, his knees were bothering him. And we stopped and we looked over Burke Mountain and all the way down the Connecticut River Valley in this beautiful vista, gorgeous blue sky day. And he stopped and he said, you know, the one thing that bothered me the most about the thought of dying, John? And I said, what's that? And he said, having to leave this place. And I suddenly realized how much his land, his farm, meant to him, and he was so much part of that kingdom. So how did I start? I started by making little mental notes of things Cole and I would say with conversations. I asked him to do some recordings for me, gave him some questions to look at and to record his thoughts and his opinions on things. And a lot of times those recordings went to farm life, the early farm life. Of course, he's being older and liked to reminisce, which was fine with me. So that's where I started. And then just slowly the book evolved. It took me 10 years, really. I was kind of lazy about it for a few years.
Talking about this.
Yeah, I told Cola I was going to write a book about him. And he said, oh, go ahead, John. Yeah, go ahead. So yeah, it just evolved over 10 years. And I think the last 2 years, I finally said to my wife, you know, that's it. I have to accomplish this. This has to get done.
Right.
And I'm real glad I did. People are enjoying it, and it seems to have a broader appeal than I expected.
Well, it's a very easy read, but it is full of lessons. And I have to quote something that you wrote in the book. You said in the preface, you said that you crossed paths with an individual who held a very traditional and somewhat unique perspective on life, on people, and most of all, politics. And what were you trying to say with that? Because especially the politics, I was trying to figure out how one explains his politics. I think he'd be a little upset today.
He'd be a lot upset today.
Exactly.
Although you know, he handled it well. I watched him in the State House, and things would just like really disgust him, but he always took it that, you know, once something had worked its way through the process, that was it.
Right.
You either win or you either lose
Right.
your side, but you move on from there. And I saw him do that a lot. I think his being unique, of course, was, like I was saying before, him growing up in the 20s through the Depression, which hardly anybody has done nowadays. But his politics, he had a unique way of discerning what government should do for people and not how we get into people's lives. And there's a distinct
Right,
line there.
exactly.
And through knowing Cola and through his work on government operations, he understood the role of government, what it should be. So in other words, we should help someone who's in need, like you would your neighbor during the Depression. But it's not a mainstay. You don't
Right.
go through
It's
three
a help
generations of
up, not a
family.
handout,
Yeah,
right.
you don't go through 3 generations of
Right.
family on public assistance.
Right.
That, you know, government is there for a reason, but he really was big on independence and being your own person and being independent.
So you could talk a little bit about his background and his lifestyle, because he presented one persona in the legislature, and certainly at home he presented another persona. And good luck with that question, John.
Well, he did and he didn't. I mean, I think it was Greg Sanford that said to me that Cola can walk through the State House and talk to everybody from the
Right.
governor right down to one of the, you know, cleaning staff.
Right.
And all along the way, he was Cola Hudson.
Right.
He was the same man.
Right.
So, but you know, you go up there and his hair is combed back straight, and he's got on his wine-colored
Right.
sports jacket and his tie, and he represented the kingdom. He was proud to be there.
Right.
And then you go to his farm, and he's got on his overalls
Right.
and his flannel shirt, and I don't know. He must have had a half a dozen hats from different companies and stuff that that gave him hats up there. And he'd just be slogging around and be very happy. And the one thing I always loved when I went to visit him, I would walk in and I'd knock, and he might be busy down at the other end of his mobile home, and all of a sudden I hear, "Yep, come on in, John. Yep, oh, glad to see you." And you know, it was always glad
Yeah,
to see you, and,
right.
and he just made you feel welcome. It's just great.
Can I ask you, we're talking about tape. Did you ever find the tape of him reading
No.
those poems?
No.
Because Bruce and I spent an afternoon with him, and he read poems on tape. And he played them for us for a good couple of hours, and we just sat with him looking at the view and listening to him reading those. So you never found them?
No.
Oh, that's a tragedy.
He read me a poem that it was anonymous author, and it started out by saying, "Come and sit down by the fire, dear friend, and talk of things," whatever it was, and went on from there. And it was about friendship. And so I said, "Oh, Cola, you got to put that on tape for me." And he said, "Yeah, I will." So when I went up there, probably the last year he was alive, and he wanted to give me something from the farm. I said, "Yeah, you can give me that tape you promised me. I'll get to it, you know." But no, he never did. I know he had it on tape.
Well, we heard it, so it was there.
I've asked all the relatives, everyone who was there that day to pack up the house and the belongings. No one could find it.
Oh,
And
that's-
being an anonymous author, I have no chance of finding it.
Because my husband is not known for emotional outbursts, but we were both very touched listening to him reading that poem.
yeah.
Because first of all, it was poems that he liked and they meant something to him, and then just the way he read it, it was great.
Yeah, it was.
great. So you've almost said it a couple of times, that little accent of his, which was truly Northeast Kingdom, correct? I mean, he
It
had
really
some
was.
dandy.
It really was. And going up there and visiting him, of course, he would take me to meet all his friends, and it was the older folks that had that distinct accent.
Right.
But I can remember, and that's what was hard in the book. You talk about trying to bring out the essence of the man. That was hard. How do you put an accent into print? So one of the things, to give you an example of like what he did, was when I would stay over at the farm, or my wife and I would stay there, in the morning he'd get up and call Bear Dog, his dog, for breakfast. And so you'd always hear, "Here, dog, here, dear dog, come on in, dear dog, come on in for breakfast." And it was that kind of a thing. And he would say, "Dear dog,"
Yeah.
legislature. And then if something was like the public school system, it would be system,
Right.
public school system. So it was very unique. And he
So
could
Madam,
put, he could,
Madam, when he used to do Madam Speaker, He would
Madam,
yell.
well, he'd say, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
That's
Speaker.
right. Mr.
But,
Speaker.
you know, when he was talking to someone and they were kind of like treating him like he was a little backwoods hickey kind of guy, he could pour it on real thick and it get even thicker.
Yeah.
And I used to just chuckle to myself because, as you know, and Pat, he was well-read and could certainly debate with the best of them.
Well, we were over, I have to digress a little, we were over at the Capitol Plaza one time and he had on the plaid shirt and the overalls because it was he came down and we were having lunch on Saturday. And the waitress was being very kind but overly solicitous because she thought that Cola was, I don't know, maybe a street person or something. And she's going on, and he's got that twinkle in his eyes. I'm like, oh, my dear young lady.
Yeah.
You were, and he just laid it on so thick. I'm like, it was so amazing. I had all I could do not to laugh. But you talk in the book about how he got involved in politics, and maybe you could explain that because he sure found his niche in the world.
Yeah, he did. Oddly enough, his parents were Democrats, and they were listening to Wendell Willkie on the radio one night as he gave his acceptance speech. I believe he was running against Roosevelt at the time. And something in Wendell Willkie's speech really hit home with Cola. And it was at that time he became a Republican. And he actually sought out Wendell Willkie's gravesite. So there's some real connection that was made that he really liked. And then he took some courses at Lyndon State College, and he had a Professor Graham S. Newell that taught up there. And it was Professor Newell that got him interested in politics, and I think probably encouraged Cola to run, and that's what got him involved.
You said something in the book about one of his neighbors talked to him about changing his look when he runs because he can't possibly campaign in the farmer outfit.
Right.
And tell them what he said.
He said, how can I possibly fool those who know me best?
Exactly. He is who he is.
Yep.
So you have to talk about Pudding Hill Farm because
Oh my gosh.
you've spent a long time, you and your wife and your family,
Yeah.
a lot of years there.
Yeah. Pudding Hill Farm is 150 acres, a hillside farm, which now the barns and the milk houses and things are gone. And when I first met Cola, they were actually living in the old farmhouse, which looked like it hadn't had a coat of paint for a century on it. And actually in 1993, they didn't have a water heater when I first met them. They would boil water
Really?
on the stove and wash and clean up, and never were those men dirty or
It
clothes
must be
dirty.
really chilly up there without heat because they were on the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
I mean,
they didn't have a water heater. They had heat.
Oh, they had
They had
heat?
wood. They had
Oh.
wood heat, and they had a kerosene
Oh, good.
heater in the kitchen. But they didn't have a
Oh.
water heater. You know, they had to boil all
Yeah.
the water all the time, just like I imagine years ago back in the 20s on the farm. But the 150 acres today, there's a lot of woods that have overgrown what used to be farmed and used to be field. But it overlooks, you can stand up out in this field and you look over Burke Mountain. You can see all the way across the valley, and there's Darling Hill Mansion staring at you. You can look all the way down to St. Johnsbury, back over to the Caledonia Airport. It's just a stunning view and so peaceful.
Right.
And you just get a sense of peace when you're there. You can feel the generations of people loving and living, and as you walk onto the land. And I was fortunate that when I visited Cola and stayed with him, I'd say, Cola, I'm going to go out for a walk. Well, you go ahead, John. Go wherever you want to. And I'd take off, and I walked a lot of that acreage.
great.
Found the old springs and
You
that
had
kind
your
of thing.
camper up there one time.
We
I
did.
was just remembering as we're talking, all these memories are coming back. You and Kitty were up there, and we came to join you on the land.
I'm sure everybody will think I'm a real cheapskate, but Kitty and I actually celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary in a tent up there. Because
where
at that
else could you
time,
be?
we were putting 3 kids through college and I had the small business. We didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
So we went up to Cola's for the weekend, brought our tent and pitched it in the little small apple orchard behind the farm. And when Kitty came up, I had a dozen of 25 roses, or I had 25 roses, not a dozen, for her. And we spent our 25th wedding anniversary up
Nice.
there. Cola thought that was great.
I think so,
And I think
too.
he took us out to dinner that night too.
Nice.
Yeah,
Miss Linden Diner.
which was
Where else? No?
which was tough to get him to spend $1. You know?
Yeah, that's true about Cola. That's true. So we should talk about not only Pudding Hill Farm, but he talked about his multi-generational farm because he had his grandmother and grandfather. Maybe you can take us through all the folks who shared the farm with Cola.
Well, from what I understand from talking to the family and from Cola, in 1903, his grandfather, Sam Ruggles, purchased the farm. And then I think Vern, his father, purchased the farm from Sam, and the boys grew up there. And Cola, I guess, inherited the farm in somewhere around 1967. So they had 3 generations actually all living under the same roof at one time. When you look at the farmhouse, it didn't look that big, but it really was. You got inside, and there was a lot of rooms.
It was pretty run down when I saw it,
Yeah,
so it's hard
yeah,
to tell.
it was run down. In fact, Kitty and I never got in to see it, probably until 3 years before he died, when he was starting to sell out. For some reason, he never brought us into the main house. And he found some comic books he wanted us to look at, and asked me if I thought there was any value, of which he had the first edition of Spider-Man, which turned out to be about $1,250 worth of value.
Wow.
But anyway, we went into the farmhouse, and it was deceivingly large. When you look at it on the outside, you wouldn't expect it to be that large. But 3 generations lived under the same roof.
Awesome. I wanted to read something, if you don't mind, from the book. And you want to read this? Why don't you know which
You
one
want me
it
to read
is?
this?
It's
Sure.
the one about when he talks about generation and what a generation gap is. Maybe
Sure.
you could read that.
He was invited to speak at the Historic Society with other farmers from the area about living and growing up on a farm in Linden. And he had this to say. He said, in October 27, Cola was part of a panel of elder farmers, and he said, I wouldn't trade it for a bushel of monkeys. I have lived in the same place that my grandfather bought in 1903 in the Pudding Hill area of Linden, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience to have lived in a 3-generation family, all under the same roof. I was in my 60s before I realized what a generation gap was, or is, because when you grow up in a 3-generation family under one roof, there isn't a generation gap. There's a continuum of life from the beginning to the end.
Awesome. That's him.
Yep, that's it.
And you know what I learned from your book? I thought that George was the brother that sort of lasted the longest, but it was George died first, and then
He did.
Archie, and I had it all these years kind of
Yeah, no,
backwards.
Archie was actually in the hospital,
Yeah.
and when Cola got word that George dropped dead of an aneurysm, I guess it
Wow,
was.
because they were all close. They never got married, never had,
Oh.
and you said he wouldn't talk about that much.
Well, I never really asked Cola about the marriage situation or not having a female companion or getting married. I like to leave some I like people to have their privacy to
Right,
some respect.
well,
and I figured if he wanted to talk about
he
it,
would.
he would. And he did tell me one story that I didn't put in the book just because I respect his privacy, but there was somebody that interested him, but it just didn't work out.
Well, he had 2 awesome companions that were with him all the time, and I didn't know about the cat. We had Hobo Cat and Bear. Bear I knew about.
Bear you knew
But talk about those 2 and how they kept
my
him
gosh.
company and how much he loved them so.
Yeah, Bear Dog was the real farm dog. Hobo Cat, George picked up as a stray, and Hobo ended up on the farm. And Cola often said, Hobo Cat's a pain in this, but he really loved him and took care of Hobo Cat, made sure where he was every night. But Bear Dog, that was his buddy.
Right.
And, we used to sit under a tree, go up there in June or July, a hot day, and we'd sit under the maple tree on a chair, and Bear Dog would disappear into the woods, and you'd hear this rummaging around, and pretty soon she'd appear, and she'd have like about a 4-foot stick in her mouth, maybe this big around, and she'd carry it all around the mobile home, and she'd go around 2-3 times, and she'd find just the right spot and drop it, and she'd chew on it for a while, and then she'd go out and she'd do it again. So every time she'd come out of the woods, Cola would say, "Doing your logging, dear dog? You doing your logging, Bear?" So he was quite the companion, and one of his relatives told me the night that Archie died, or a couple nights after Archie died, she went over to see how Cola was doing, and he was lying on the floor with his arm around Bear Dog crying. So Bear was, at that time, his only companion,
I
that was
remember
around.
one time he was walking, Cola was walking out of the woods, and all of a sudden, 10 minutes later or 5 minutes later, here comes Bear. I think that was the first time I saw Bear, just following, always by Cola's side, always.
You going to tell him the story, what happened
Well,
to
I
Bear?
should say, after Cola died, which we'll talk about in a little while, John had promised Cola that he would take Bear because we didn't want anything to happen to Bear. And I'm not sure how it all happened, but I was very upset. I wanted Bear. I wanted Bear to come live with us. And I was worried he was not going to be able to make the transition. And I called Bear's veterinarian, and he says, "Pat, it's a dog. You bring it home, you set the rules, and the dog will be fine. And she was. And we brought, Cola had built her a square box, which she kept on the porch, and the dog mostly spent most of the evenings in the cold and all that stuff with Cola's shirts and clothes. And we just brought everything with us, and I brought it home. And it took her about 2 days to realize that in the house at night was not a bad thing, because by this time, I think she was 14, wasn't she?
Yeah, and she always slept outside
Well,
at
not
Cola's.
not in our house.
Yeah, and I don't know why, but you should know this lady has a heart, because she called me up and said, "What's going to happen to Bear Dog? I would really like Bear Dog." And so Kitty and I discussed it, and we were both working at the time, and Pat and Bruce were retired, and I said to Kitty, "Maybe, I know Pat loves her and would take care of her, so let's do
Good
this."
thing I didn't know about the cat. The cat would have gone with me too. So I didn't know there was a cat. I think I just it didn't click.
But just to tell you a story, Bear, I'd go up there in January, it'd be 20 below zero, and Cola had made like this wooden box out on the porch, maybe 4x4 with blankets and stuff in it. And Bear would be out there, and we'd have dinner and whatnot, and Cola would go out and say, "Bear, you want your dinner?" And she'd come in, and I'm thinking, boy, it's freezing out there. So Bear, after dinner, would come in and stretch out between us.
Right.
And then within 20 minutes, get up and go to the door. And Cole would say, "Bear, it's cold out there." She'd scratch on the door. And she never would sleep in the house, regardless of how cold it was.
She got used to sleeping, and she would climb. We have a couple of stairs going up to the second floor, and that darn dog, huge, climb up the stairs, would sleep on the floor on my side of the bed, because she couldn't, she was too big to put on the bed. We'd have to buy a different bed.
Well, maybe it's a good thing she didn't stay inside, because when I'd stay there, from what I hear from you, she snored like the Dickens, and I probably would have stayed awake all night.
In order to get out of the bed, I pretty much had to jump over her, and I was so attached to her I swear this is terrible, for about a year after she passed away. I was still jumping over the dog, because I always thought she'd be there. But anyway, it was just amazing to have her there. A lot of great stories about Bear. And towards the end, she couldn't make it up the stairs, and we'd help her up, and by 8:30, we had to be home, or that dog was mad. She wanted to be in the house, up in bed, and that was it. So anyway.
Well, you gave her she lived about another 3 years,
wasn't
it?
Yeah, she was 16, maybe almost 17 by the time, and so she did good. She had a good retirement, we tell her. Yes, she did. She did. But she missed Cola, because we couldn't take that. She slept in that box and with his clothes for quite a while till she
and
made
when
the
she
transition.
died, Pat and her husband had her cremated, and so I have to say that half a bear is buried with Cola, and half a bear is with Pat.
I'm sure it wasn't
Bruce.
quite legal what we did, but we returned Bear to Cola. I had bought a bush, remember?
We only dug a little hole.
I brought a bush up so they wouldn't know what we were up to, and we put Bear under the bush, and so she's
had
next
to be.
Cola.
He had to be with Cola and both you guys, because you were.
Because Bruce was.
You were all he knew.
We had a share with Bruce, because we were so attached.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. What these animals do, Chris, my dog now, I could go a whole show talking about the dog we have now, so anyway. But you and your wife spent so much time up there, and your kids were so attached to him, so you were his family.
Yeah.
Weren't you?
Yeah. As the kids got older, and they've all moved out of state, Kitty and I went up one Easter. We couldn't travel to see the kids that year, so called Cola and said, "Would you like to celebrate Easter?" And he said, "Why, sure." So we went up with a big ham, and he got some food, and we pooled together, and we had a really nice Easter dinner. We did that at Christmas one time. So he was like I can't say a grandfather. He really was like an older brother to me more than anything.
Really?
And I said in the book, I've never, until I met Cola, I really didn't know what a real friend was, because he always accepted me for me,
right?
And I accepted him for him. And even though sometimes we disagree, it never got between us.
I didn't write any notes about this, but in the car you were riding, taking one of your trips through the Northeast Kingdom, and he said something about the sign of a true friend is that you can sit in a car and not say anything.
Yeah.
And
we were traveling, going what we call pond hopping, where Cola would take me on these back roads and cow paths and everything through the kingdom, places that tourists never see. And we were traveling along, and I think suddenly we realized we had gone like 15, 20 minutes where we hadn't said a word. And Cola just turned to me and said, this is a sign of true friendship.
That's great.
Yeah, I
Well,
thought.
you guys were.
Yeah.
So there is a quote in the book, and I was thinking about Cola being in the State House these days, and this quote, which I like, was, "People today," and this was back in his day, so can you imagine?
Right.
"People today don't know the difference between a want and a need."
Mm-hmm.
I really think he would struggle. I do. I know you said he could adjust, but people need more than they want these days.
Yeah, but when it came to representing
Well, that's
his
true.
people in the State
He
House,
did. Yeah,
nothing would stop him.
that's true.
I mean, as disgusted as he would get, he would want to be there to do what's right for his people in the kingdom
Right.
as best he could.
And certainly not right for him, whatever was right for
No,
them.
no, he never profited. That man had nothing but integrity.
Yeah.
And you could be the governor, he would tell you to go fry ice if he thought it was going to
Right.
hurt or inhibit the people of
Yeah.
the kingdom for any reason. It doesn't matter whether you're a party leader, governor, it doesn't matter. He did what was right for his people, and that's what impressed me a lot.
That's great. That's great. So he was asked to do the commencement speech at an 8th grade graduate. I love this story, John. And there's a lot more to this story than what I'm going to read something that he said, which I can just imagine him being the crusty old guy he is, talking to all these 8th graders, and I bet they listened to every word because they've thought, who is this?
Well, it
Who
was neat
is
that he
this?
didn't condescend to the
Yeah,
8th
no, he was
graders.
talking to them.
Yeah, he didn't bring down the level of the speech. It was very mature.
Well, that's
I thought.
actually, that's one thing that impressed me, because I was like, whoa, he's talking to 8th graders.
Right.
And I think this is talking right at them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read this. I'm going to read it quickly because I want to talk about, have you talk about Cola. But I just thought, he said, "I offer for your consideration a way of life that you are in control of, instead of being controlled, and see what a great feeling it is to trust thyself and be a nonconformist, as my old friend Mr. Waldo Emerson called it," and he loved Waldo Emerson.
He did.
And "I will not make any claim to you that what I have said is easy. I do feel that it is easier in the long run, however, that to live a life controlled by others, unless you are a weak-willed person that likes to blame others for your own actions. If this is the kind of person you want to be, then what I have said does not fit into your picture of how you want to live. The choice is yours. Only you can make it. When you have made that choice, don't try and say that others made you do it. Only you can make decisions of what your actions will be. And if you choose one way and later find out that you were wrong, then take the consequences and make the best of it. At that point, you may realize that you have used bad judgment. We are all guilty of this at times, that you have the opportunity for a second chance. I strongly suggest that you try what I have said. You might like it." I mean, really. Right to these 8th graders, I bet.
Yeah.
I mean,
He was a big fan of Emerson's essays, and as you know, I'm sure you know, that he was friends with Governor Madeline Kunin. They were on the same committee, and while they never voted on anything together,
Right.
the two of them became good friends. And in fact, Cola went to Madeline's son's bar mitzvah. First time he had experienced a bar mitzvah, and he thought it was great because Cola was he was really interested in everything around him. So he loved Emerson. And the one thing about Emerson was that being a nonconformist, that stuck with him. And to be a nonconformist today, and you think about the youth today and how they follow everything,
Right.
follow the latest trends, the latest
Right.
styles. And it's like, I used to tell my kids, don't be a follower, be a leader.
Right.
You don't have to follow it. If one person gets a cell phone, everybody's got to have a cell phone. If somebody's on Facebook, they all have to be on Facebook. If somebody takes purple dye in their hair, they all have purple dye in their hair. It just stop being a follower and start being a leader. And that's what Cola, I think, was trying to tell the 8th graders.
Yeah, well, he certainly made, it went on, your story went on for a couple of pages, and it was just great. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall listening to what the 8th graders said
Right.
the next day or right after the speech, because I bet he made an impact on them.
Yeah.
Because you're right, some of these words, he just spoke right to them, not down to them.
No.
That was great.
Yeah, did a great
So
job.
you've hinted a little bit about some of his legendary things that he would do on the floor. I have a few of them myself. Cola had sayings that for when I joined the legislature, he was still there. And after he passed away, for years, people would stand up and quote him because
Wow.
I mean, I don't know if you have some of them off the top of your head, but
Well,
maybe
just
you
the
could.
ones that were in the book.
Yeah, but
I'll give you one quick one. I don't want to give them all away, but the one I really loved that just brought the house down was, we had a fish and wildlife bill that was a simple bill, and it went on for, I don't know, hours. We couldn't figure out why this bill's going on this long. It wasn't any big deal, but Fish and Wildlife's on the House floor in Vermont back then.
Right.
Everything was a big deal. So all of a sudden he stands up, and of course when the member from Linden stands up, because he rarely did, the speaker recognized him right off, and so he stands up and he shakes a little bit with his hands. He grabs his microphone and goes, "Mr. Speaker, I hope I live long enough to vote on this bill." And he puts his microphone down.
That's great.
And sits down. It was his way of ending debate without moving to end debate, because he never would. He'd
Right,
never do that.
right.
He said the wall of the House was for debate.
Right.
And anybody who wants to say something should be allowed to and never cut off.
Right.
So he had his little ways of ending debate. And that's really signaled the House with humor that maybe we've gone on too long.
Yeah. Well, there was one that you didn't put in the book, which is the one I always quote, and you may remember it better than I, when he stood up, and I can't do the accent. "Madam Speaker, it seems that everything that could be said has been said, just not by everyone," because everybody was standing up saying the same thing. And of course, once again, the whole House just
Right.
went into convulsions. Could you talk about him in House Government Ops? That was the committee he was in. He actually chaired it for.
Yeah, I think I made a mistake in the book. I said 9 years. I think it was 9 terms. He was there.
Oh, that's
it was there most of his legislative career,
Yeah,
either as the chairman or as the ranking member.
right.
The only times he was off the committee was when Speaker Ralph Wright, what I call, banished him to local government.
Yeah, well, talk about that, because that was.
I don't know what the reason was, but he took Cola off government ops kind of as a.
Was it on the reapportionment, or that was something else?
No,
That was a
I think it was
different
just because Cola was Republican and he knew he wanted that committee.
There
and,
you go.
And Ralph just took him off and put
Yep.
him on local government, knowing that it's kind of a slap to him.
Right.
Cola took it in stride. You know, it didn't bother him. But as you know, because you testified in front of government
Right.
operations, that was his life, because he really was interested in how government works for people
Right.
and affects people. And he wanted to be on that committee.
And he liked legislators, witnesses, like people from the administration, who were honest, who told the truth, and if they didn't know the answer, they would say, and I quote, "I do not know the answer." Because some of us, and I have been known to do it once or twice, you don't want to say that, so you come up with something and hope it sounds good, and he would catch you every time.
He'd say to me, somebody was in committee that day, and he goes, "Good God, John," he says, I didn't know whether I was going to go for the jugular or just stick it in him and twist it slow."
That'd be him. Well, and I told you before the show, he hated, I don't know why, but he hated the word redact. And I think it's because when you take out words and redact them, you're hiding things and you're not being transparent, and I'm sure he didn't like that. Well, I said the word redact. The entire committee sucked in air because they knew what was coming, and Cola laid into me, and I had no idea what was coming. But you can't help but love the guy, even when he's yelling at you.
I know.
It's so ridiculous. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, we have a little bit of time, so I'm going to, you have to
hours
talk
flying
about
by.
where the word cola came from, because I thought
His
that was
name?
pretty interesting.
His, he tells the story that when he was born, the doctor showed up having consumed an undeterminable amount of alcohol. And his mother and father wanted to name him, and I don't even know where they got this name from, but they wanted to name him Kohler, which Kohler.
Oh,
German,
German, right?
German name.
Right.
So, of course, they had a Northeast Kingdom accent, and he had imbibed quite heavily, and so instead of hearing Kohler, he heard Cola. And
There
he
you
wrote
go.
down Cola, and
it
it stuck.
Yeah.
And people used to say, you know, "What do you think about having the name Cola?" He goes, "Having a different name never bothered me."
There you go. Well, because do you know I officially named a bear Cola Bear. I changed
okay.
I changed the name to Cola Bear.
Oh, cool.
So it's on officially at the veterinarians. They said, "What's the name?" I said, "Cola Bear." So we would always remember. And he he worked on, oh, now I forgot, 2 or 3 reapportionments. And there was a time there where Ralph Wright, who was, well, explain Ralph to people that don't remember back then.
Well, I only served under Ralph for 1 year, but to give you an idea, I came in and Ralph was, I guess, from Boston, brought Bostonian-style hardball politics.
Yep.
And I had kind of a love, and I think Cola did too, a love-hate relationship with Ralph because he could spill the blood of anybody in his on the office walls who crossed him or didn't agree with him, even from his own party. He was brutal. He was a brutal speaker. In fact, one day I met him in the hall in the Cedar Creek room. It was early in the session. I'd only been there a week, and I walked by him and I said, "Hi, Mr. Speaker," and he goes, "LaBarge, you got an R behind your name. You're my enemy."
And hello to you too.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I didn't know. I mean, I'm just a freshman legislator.
Right.
I'm thinking,
Welcome,
holy crap.
welcome to the State House.
Yeah, so I told Cole about it. Cole just chuckled and said, well, at least you know where you stand, LaBarge. So, yeah, Ralph was brutal, but we had respect for him because on the floor of the House, he was fair on calling on people. He was fair in listening to your point if you called a point of order.
Right.
Didn't always get your way, but at least he would
He was also a man of his word.
And
if he said he was going to do something,
right, and he was retired military, and he
Yeah.
really liked the protocol of the House.
Yep.
And that's something I think the House has gotten away from what I hear.
Do you know when I left the legislature, you're supposed to stand up and give a fair, you know what my speech was about? Don't lose the protocol, because they're just not paying attention to protocol.
Ralph would actually put on a class for freshmen before we went to tell us
Really?
about the protocol of the House.
Good for
as
him.
Speaker. Yeah, that happened the year I was there. First year I
Tried
was
and
there.
true. Don't mess with it, it works.
Yeah.
One thing you had in your book, which I had absolutely no idea about, and I don't know where these people sat, in the first reapportionment, and Cola talked about it shifting the political landscape of Vermont forever, they went in the House from 248 members down to 150 members. That's huge.
We used to have a representative for each town.
I guess I never, where did these people sit?
I don't know, and they all had spittoons, and they were allowed to smoke pipes and cigars
Yes, and
too.
they had elephants come in there too, right, for entertainment?
And I was told the place would be blue with smoke.
Oh my.
Yeah.
But anyway, what was the purpose of? I mean,
Well, the state was getting big, and of course now each representative is supposed to represent the same number of people.
right? Was it 4,000?
Well, when I was there, it was about 4,500 people
Okay.
each for a House seat, for a House
Yeah.
district. But, it really shifted the power because you look at Chittenden County now, and they have somewhere around 11
Yeah.
representatives in the House
Right.
and 6 senators. I mean, they have 1/5 of the Senate.
Right.
And I looked up this year, and all 4 of the senators come from Burlington, 2 come from South Burlington. So even out of all Chittenden County, you don't have a senator from Essex or Milton or Colchester or any of the outlying areas in Chittenden County. It's all local, it's all centralized in Burlington.
Yeah.
In South Burlington.
There
So it
is-
really
there
shifted.
was talk this year about splitting that up somehow
Yeah.
because I think the power is getting
And I
to
can
be
and I can remember
recognized.
Janice Beasley from Guilhall, and she represented 21 towns. So here you got one representative for 21 towns, and how many in Burlington representing one town?
Right.
It really shifted the political, and of course the cities being more liberal than the outlying
Right.
areas.
Right.
It
Yeah,
changed
because
the
I
whole
think there
tenure of
was,
the
at least
State
to
House.
have culture, I mean, some of the other outlying areas have their own representatives, and not so much in that bulk of Burlington.
Yeah,
which I sort of
when I
agree
was
with.
there during reapportionment, we had really discussed breaking the Senate up in Chittenden County to either 2 3-member districts or 3 2-member districts.
Right, right.
And give other people from the other towns a chance to win.
And you said Ralph didn't want Cola to do the reapportionment, and you sort of talked him into it, didn't you?
No, it was Walt
Was it-
Freed.
Oh,
was
Walt Freed.
speaking.
Oh, well, after. Oh,
Yeah, it was our
okay.
own speaker.
Oh, great.
When
They're Republican.
when I became leader, Walt became speaker. Well, it was that Rich Westman and Rick Hubie, who since deceased, they worked on reapportionment for a good portion of the year. And Walt wasn't all that familiar with how COLA worked. And I just think there was a trust issue there. And when I was called in to go over committee assignments with Walt, I agreed with Walt on everything until it came time for government operations. And I said, I'm going to ask you to put COLA back in his chair. So we went around and around, and I said, look, Walt, I haven't bucked you on one assignment for chairman.
Yeah.
I said, I'm asking you this to give this man back his dignity. He will handle this. I'm telling you, he will handle it. And so Walt said to me, LaBarge, if he messes up, it's going to be on your head.
Right.
And then before reapportionment was over and the way COLA handled the committee and handled the public hearings and everything, Walt said, and he met with Walt, COLA, and Walt met quite a few times. Walt said to me, COLA's doing a great job.
That's good.
So, and COLA was busting at the buttons, being chair of his committee again.
Right, that's
Yeah.
great. Now, he lived in Barry, with, what's it, no, it's Montpelier, on Berlin Street, that's what I meant to say. He lived with Richie Westman,
Bill Johnson.
Bill Johnson.
And Bob Helm.
And Bob Helm in Stephanie Quaranta's mother's house,
Yes.
Lydia.
Yeah.
And I cannot remember her name, and she loved COLA. The whole family did.
And they loved her.
Oh,
She used to
totally.
bring them pies and leave them on the table and all kinds
Exactly.
of goodies. And
They just loved it there, and
Yeah.
they have some great stories, those guys.
Oh, yeah.
From there, I don't think it's ever been the same in Lydia's house. So I guess we should talk a little bit about the goodbye. You have a chapter at the end about saying goodbye to COLA, and maybe you could just talk us through that.
oh dear.
If you're able to, John, I'm right with you.
Yeah, well, Pat, you were the one that called me to let me know COLA had
Yeah.
died. I was supposed to meet COLA on a Friday. Well, first of all, COLA, when we went to see COLA that Christmas time, he was not looking good. And I thought, oh my God, have I seen my buddy for the last time? And we said our goodbyes, and then I went to the State House. I had to go over to the State House to testify on something. And I walked in, this was the first week, and as I walked into the hallway there at the State House, there was COLA with his back to me. He had his wine-colored jacket on and his charcoal pants, and his hair slicked all combed back nice. And I walked up and I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, hey, bud, how you doing? And he goes, oh, hi, John, how are you? And I said, great. And he just seemed glowing. I
Good.
mean, he looked great. And we talked for a few minutes, and I told him I had to get into the committee to testify. And I said, I have a friend that I want you to meet. Can you do lunch on Friday? And he said, sure. Any friend of yours is a friend of mine. So I said, okay. So Friday, I was at work, and I was getting ready to go down to the State House to meet him with Bill Euler, a friend of mine from work, and I got a call from Bob Helm, and Bob said, COLA wanted me to call you that he can't make lunch today. And I said, what's up? He goes, oh, he's got a heck of a cold, and he had to call someone from Linden, Dwight, to come and pick him up. And I thought, boy, that's really strange, because he had his car, and no way COLA would impose on anybody if he
Right.
couldn't get there. So I thought something's really strange. And I said, what do you mean, Bob? He had someone pick him up. And he said, well, it took him like 15 minutes to walk from the back porch to his car. And I knew something was wrong. So I started calling later that afternoon at his house, and no answer. So I finally called the hospital in St. Johnsbury, and they said, yes, we admitted Mr. Hudson, but we transferred him to Dartmouth. And now I'm really convinced something's wrong. So all the next day, I tried getting hold of him, and I couldn't get hold of him. And Sunday was my birthday, and I got hold of him in the morning, picked up the phone, and I said, hey, bud, what's up? What's going on? Well, first of all, they wouldn't let me talk to him, and I said, well, I'm his only surviving nephew.
Close enough.
And they actually put me through.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, bud, what's going on? And he goes, well, they tell me I got lots of things wrong. He said, they're going to work on one at a time.
He wasn't dealing, because he had been dealing with cancer at one point when he was in the legislature, but that wasn't anything
That was
to do with
prostate
this.
cancer,
Oh,
yeah.
he was all better.
So, yeah, so he didn't sound good, and his answers were kind of short, and he almost sounded angry. And I said, kind of half joking with him, I said, well, don't you go anywhere. I'm coming in tomorrow to see you. And he said, okay. And that was it. And so I didn't press it. He kind of sounded tired. He sounded angry. And I guess you had gone up to see him.
Yeah, but they wouldn't. I saw him once before, but that day they wouldn't let me in.
No.
And I left for him, as I told you. I left him I found a dog. Honest, I don't know. They must have used Bear as the model for this stuffed dog I got. And Donna Swaney, we have to give a shout out to Donna, because Donna was the chair of GovOps after COLA was chair, and I think she loved him so much. I mean, the admiration and the love that committee and Donna in particular had for COLA was just amazing. But anyway, she told me that he saw the gift and everything, and later I told you they actually put the stuffed dog in with COLA in the coffin, which
Oh,
just,
nice.
oof, that was hard to deal
Yeah.
with. But anyway, that was the day, I think.
Right.
On my way home, Donna called me and told me he died, and then I called you
Right.
from the
Well,
car.
we had friends coming over. It was actually my 56th birthday. And he died on my
You said
birthday.
that.
And
Your birthday.
and I said to Kitty, leave it to Hudson to die on my birthday so I'll never, ever forget.
Exactly.
You know, but yeah, it was a passing. He had made me promise many years before to speak at his service.
Right.
Right out of the blue, he asked me that. And I said, I don't think I'll be in any shape to speak at your service when the time comes, Cola. And quick as a button, he said, oh, yes, you will.
Yeah.
And he wanted me to keep it on the lighter side, so I did, held it together till the very end. But
You did
yeah.
a great job. That place, they had it at Linden Institute.
Oh,
and
600 people.
Yeah, 600 people, and there were busloads of all the legislators, of which I was one. And the stories in that bus was just
Oh, I'll bet.
was amazing. It was
I'll bet.
amazing.
Yeah, but there's hardly a day goes by I don't think of him.
Oh, bad.
I'll hear something on
John,
the
I
news
just
or
thought
something.
about the yellow school, the one-room schoolhouse. Did they ever do anything with it? Maybe talk about that a little bit, because you were talking
Well,
about
it was-
doing something with that.
Yeah, it was many years. I didn't know it, and he had a little. I didn't know where he went to school. He talked about a one-room schoolhouse, and I didn't realize I had driven by it. I don't know how many times. It's up at the Caledonia Airport
It's on the airport property,
and there was a little yellow building that was being used by the Civil Air Patrol.
right?
And so one day he said, "Did I ever show you my one-room schoolhouse?" And I said, "No." So he took me down there, and I couldn't believe it. And we actually got to go inside. And so I said, you know, I think it was after Cola died, I was approached by someone from Linden State College that said, we would like to move that over to Linden State College
Right.
and then make some kind of a memorial for Cola out of it, use it for some art or whatever. And I thought that was a great idea. Rich Westman tried to get the appropriation from the legislature. It never happened, and one of the reasons is we can't move it because of the height, and we can't find a way to get it down with all the power lines and
Oh,
stuff down
right,
to the Linden
right.
State campus.
Right. Oh, that's
So
too
it
bad.
never happened. I was hoping we could take it apart in pieces. That would have
Yep.
been nice, but
Yeah.
it was never to be.
Because I remember somehow I was up there one day with transportation, and I saw it too. I don't think I went in it, but it was right there,
Right.
And when you go in the gate, it was right there.
You just reminded me about Representative Sweeney. We should make sure that she knows this is out.
Yeah, so
and
I
out.
sent it to her.
Oh,
She
did?
knows.
Okay.
And
My marketing person.
Well, I think this is so great to do this. And when I went to the legislature, I was in the education committee. And Howard Crawford, who had left the legislature and came back, wanted to be on the education committee. So Gay Symington came and asked me if I would go to GovOps, which is really, with my background, a much better place.
Perfect.
And they let me sit in Cola's chair,
Oh, my goodness.
which was right at the end, and that was his chair. So I got to sit in his chair, and they have in that committee room the biggest picture of Cola and
Yeah, they
Bear.
do.
I think Bear, yeah, Bear's in it because he's got one of his striped shirts on. And there you go.
I haven't been back in the room since he's
Well,
died.
it's
so.
there. So, but you know what? There's very, very few people, as the years
That
go by,
remember.
that will remember him because he was such a,
Yeah.
just such a
Cola,
unique
Cola
guy.
said to me one time, "Do you think anybody will remember me in 50 years?" And boy, I had to stop and think, and I said, "Cola, is anybody going to remember us in 50 years?
Right.
Because we're only 2 generations from being a photo on the wall and a name where your grandkids, your great-grandchildren
exactly.
don't really know you. They know your
Right,
maybe your name or
right.
see your photo."
Well, now they've got a book to read, John.
So I'm hoping, yeah, I put this out there, and I'm hoping
And you mentioned Tex in there too, and Tex was
Richard.
Yes, I'm sorry. He was his nephew. No, what was the relationship?
a
with
cousin,
Tex?
second cousin.
Okay, because he was really the only living relative. Lived out in California,
Right.
and they came here. And I know you mentioned the trailer. We didn't talk about that. When the house got to the point where we couldn't live in the house anymore, they built it. They had a beautiful trailer.
Right, George
huge.
actually lived in Thetford and worked at a grocery store and lived in an apartment above the grocery store. So George was one brother that didn't live on the farm. George was going to retire. Cola was in the State House, but pretty much retired from everything else. So they purchased a mobile home together.
Right.
Paid cash.
Oh, well, and that's only he would do that,
Right.
he said.
Right. Don't borrow. Pay
Exactly.
cash. If you
You
can't
can't
afford
afford-
cash, you can't afford it.
Exactly.
So they paid cash for it, but Archie didn't want to leave the farmhouse. Boy, Archie was pretty stubborn man. Great guy though, I loved him. Yeah, so they bought the mobile home, had it moved in, and George never got to see it. He died the week before it was delivered.
Oh, wow. That's very
So George
sad,
and
'cause
Archie,
they were
George and
so
Archie moved
close.
in together.
Yeah.
And I can remember saying to Archie, "Boy, you got a dishwasher," or to Cola, and Cola said, "Oh, real uptown kind of living, John."
Exactly. That's our guy.
Yeah.
Well, John, is there anything else that we have a few minutes left? If you want that, I
No,
haven't
get the
touched
book,
on?
and I hope you
Get the book.
enjoy it, because I think it has broad appeal. There's a little bit of politics in there, but I think it's a lot more
Well,
than
it's a
that.
message, John. It's a message
Yeah.
about how one should look at their life. And he talked a
Right.
lot about the importance of using your mind.
Yeah.
I read something in there. It was just so him. And he was so smart, and he could put you down
Yeah.
without even
Someone
knowing what hit you.
Someone who didn't know Cola said, she thought it was a great read a summer read for tourists, because it's a little bit about Vermont,
right.
back early farming, and a little bit of history about a man from the Northeast Kingdom that started out modest means and ended up in the
There
legislature.
you go.
So
And
it's
I think Linden has a, what do you call it, funding that they put aside for kids. Don't they have a, what
yes,
do you
they
call
have
that?
a-
A grant? No, not a grant. What do they call it? I
it's-
can't remember.
yeah, I can't remember what it is.
But anyway, they have some funding that they would give to a student in Cola's name.
Foundation?
Foundation, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, because we all
Age
sort
is a
of-
wonderful thing, isn't it?
we all
Yeah.
donated to that afterwards, so
Yeah.
that was
Well,
good.
Pat, this has been great.
Well, it's been wonderful, John.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
I've
We're going
really
to show
enjoyed it.
pictures from your book
Okay.
to get people to right after we
Okay.
stop chatting. And I really hope you check out Cola Hudson. I just loved him with all my heart, and his puppy dog Cola Bear.
Cola Bear.
You didn't know I did that.
Bear dog.
Cola Bear.
Dear bear dog.
Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.